Okay, so here we are in Houdini. We'll start by creating the project. Now we're all set, and let's start by creating a geonode. I'll call this ADV terrain. Dive inside, and we'll type LiDAR import. We'll look for this node. So this is something that already comes with Houdini. And with this, we can import that point cloud. Let's select the files that we just downloaded from Open Topography. I'll call these ground points. And it'll take some time to cook them. And we'll press F to frame them. And here we have them. As you can see, not exactly on the right spot and not exactly with the right orientation. No problem. We'll just apply a transform to rotate this. Okay, so to put it back on to the origin, we'll use the centroid. So I'm gonna negate the centroid. If you hover over the node, this one, and I'm gonna press middle mouse button, and you'll see that we have a center coordinates here. So we're pretty far away from the origin. We need to put it back in there. So what we'll do is we'll type negate the centroid coordinates. So I'm going to type minus dollar CEX. So this refers to the x coordinate of the centroid. Next, we can move on to y, do the same thing, minus dollar CEY. And finally, on the next one, we'll do minus dollar CEZ. Once we've done that, our points are now centered on the pivot. And as you can see, I'm going to call this to origin. Now let's apply another transform to correct the rotation. Orient. Okay, so this one is called select all. I'm gonna Alt A, click and drag on this one, and just automatically adjust their position, align them. Now on this one, I'm gonna type minus N minus 90, and there we have it. So we have a good proper orientation and proper positioning for our point cloud. Now, if you remember, we have 2 point cloud sets. Okay, we have a point set for the ground and another point set for the vegetation. Let's bring in the vegetation as well. I'm gonna kind of copy all these just so it comes right straight to the same place in orientation. Holding Alt, I'm gonna click and drag. It's gonna cook again the ground points, but I'm gonna switch here to vegetation points. The vegetation points is another file, so I'll have to select that second file, vegetation. This one will take a bit longer because it has more points than the ground points. And here we have the vegetation points. If we middle mouse button this node, we'll see that we have 33 million points, and on the ground points we have 8 million points. So quite a big difference between one and the other. Now, the first thing we want to do is make sure we mix both of them before applying these transformations. The reason why is because the centroid, as you can imagine, having different points and different point positions, the centroid of the ground points and the centroid of the vegetation point isn't going to be exactly the same. So these transforms, we're actually going to only apply them once to these 2 point sets merged. So I'm gonna delete these. I'll create a merge, and we'll merge the ground points with the vegetation points, and then we'll move them to the origin and orient them properly. And now they're perfectly aligned and at the origin. Now, for us to be able to easily select one or the other, let's just apply a point group for the ground points. We'll switch to, we'll tell it's ground, and for the other one, for the vegetation, we'll say it's vegetation. And that way we can go back to those independently whenever we want. I'm gonna disable the grid now. Now, to finish up this lesson, the other thing I'm gonna do is add some delete nodes that will allow us to kind of reduce the resolution of these very easily. So I'm gonna lower these, and what I mean by that is if we add a delete node, let's play with the ground points first. And here on the delete node, we have an option by range. Let's select points. And that means we can select every one, eliminate one of every 2 points. Okay, if I go to the orient here and just temporarily connect just the ground points, we barely notice any difference in terms of the amount of detail that we have, but middle mouse button here and you'll see we only have half the points. The number of points now is not as difficult, as demanding in terms of computer resources, so it's going to be easier for us to let's have a look at this with and without the delete. So there is a slight difference, but it isn't substantial. In fact, on the side of the vegetation node, the vegetation points is where we're actually going to be needing a bit more of this, because 33 million points is quite a bit. So I'm just going to alt click and drag to copy this, and I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to eliminate maybe 2 out of 3. So 2/3 of the vegetation points is going to be eliminated. And again, we won't really notice much of a difference. This is something that we can disable later on, but I'm going to keep this one disabled for now, on the ground point side, and I'm just going to keep this one enabled. Again, if we disable, we see a lot more points, but it's not really something that's very, very visible. Another thing that might help us in terms of visualizing this, and that's a matter of personal preference, I think this gives us so much detail. It's an amazing detail that we get just from this. But if you, for some reason, you're not a big fan of how this looks, you can try and press T on the viewport. And here on the geometry, you can switch the display particles as points and go into pixels. That'll give us a more, it's hard to see. It's probably much harder to have a reading of the volumetric properties of this, but some people might prefer it. Not a big fan. I think the other option of rendering them as points in the viewport actually works better, so I'm going to keep them as points, but just so you know, you do have that option. Okay, but at this distance, for instance, it gives us a nice reading, I think. So we have good amount of terrain and also a good amount of vegetation on this. And right now, this lesson was basically just to import the points and start processing them. At this stage, just applying different groups and bringing them to the origin and orient them properly. Now let's move on to the next lesson.